Good morning, and welcome to Flight 93 National Memorial. My name is Stephen Clark, and I have the high honor of serving as the superintendent of Flight 93 National Memorial, one of over 400 sites within the National Park system. The National Park Service is honored and deeply humbled to serve as the steward of this moving memorial dedicated in memory of 40 amazing heroes. On this day, 18 years ago, the passengers and crew members of Flight 93 bonded together and prevented their hijacked airplane from reaching its intended target, Washington, D.C., a mere 18 minutes flying time from this very location. Unquestionably, they sacrificed their own lives to save so many. Ever since that moment, these special people have always been remembered as heroes, not just to Americans, but also many around the world. Extraordinary citizens who showed incredible strength and resilience under extraordinary circumstances. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the many dignitaries and representatives in attendance today. The Vice President of the United States of America, Mike Pence, and Second Lady Karen Pence. I'd like to recognize the Secretary of the Interior, Mr. David Bernhardt. Pennsylvania State Senator and a dear friend, Mr. Pat Stefano. The President of Guinea. I cannot tell you how honored and humbled we are, Mr. President, to have you in attendance with your group. It truly is an honor. Thank you. Dr. Niels von Redeker from the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany in Washington, D.C. I'd like to recognize a dear man, a true gentleman, who has been instrumental for Flight 93 over these many years, Mr. King Laughlin of the National Park Foundation. A gentleman I just met merely moments ago, but I can already say that Mr. Zukoff here is absolutely going to be a tremendous partner, and I'm looking forward to Mitchell's comments here this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, author Mitchell Zukoff. And finally, I'd especially like to thank and acknowledge the families and of the passengers and crew members of Flight 93 joining us here this morning. Thank you so very much. At this time, I would like to extend a very special thank you to the many, many volunteer ambassadors who represent Flight 93 National Memorial on a daily basis and help connect visitors to the individual stories of these 40 amazing people. Yearly, think about this, yearly, volunteer ambassadors provide approximately 10,000 hours of their valuable time, which equals approximately $250,000 of in-kind services. Absolutely astounding. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd also like to acknowledge and thank our law enforcement officers, firefighters, emergency medical personnel, and members of our military for keeping this great nation safe each and every day. And finally, to our local communities and their caring leaders, to include Lambertsville, Stoystown, Shanksville, Friedens, Indian Lake, Stony Creek Township, and Somerset County itself, who have all provided tremendous and unwavering support to the development of this memorial over these many years. I thank you all. At this time, would you please stand as you are able for the national anthem performed today by the River City Brass Band. I ask that you please remain standing as Reverend Paul Britton, brother of Flight 93 passenger Marion Britton, leads us in the moment of unity.
A Hebrew poet, moved, inspired, and filled with the presence of his God, her God, wrote these words for us. How very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. It is like the precious oil on the head running down upon the beard of Aaron, running over the collar of his robe. It is like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the mountains of Zion. We gather together today as kindred minds, a unity in thought, in memory, and in love. We come here to be a good and pleasant gathering of sisters and brothers in our joint humanity with one thought: thanksgiving for the 40, with one love, love for the 40, with one honor for the 40, that they may bind us here in this place and always into one community. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. "18 years ago, this very day, September 11th, at 10:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93 impacted the Earth just several hundred feet from the very spot on which I stand. At this special time, Flight 93 National Memorial Ambassador and the President of the Friends of Flight 93, Donna Gibson, will lead the reading of the names of the passengers and crew members of Flight 93. Donna will be joined by family members reading the names of their loved ones. For each name, Judy Brandt and Jane Wagner, who also proudly serve as Flight 93 ambassadors, will ring the bells of remembrance in their memory.
Christian Adams. Lorraine G. Bay, flight attendant. Todd M. Beamer. Alan Anthony Bevan. Mark Bingham.
Diora Frances Bodley.
Sandy Wah Bradshaw. Marion R. Britton. Thomas E. Burnett, Jr. William Joseph Cashman.
My sister, Georgine Rose Corrigan.
Patricia Cushing.
Captain Jason Dahl.
Joseph DeLuca. Patrick Joseph Driscoll. Edward Porter Felt. Jane C. Folger. Colleen L. Frazier. Andrew Sonny Garcia. Jeremy Logan Click. Kristen Osterholm White Gould. Lauren Catuzzi Grancolas, an unborn child.
Wanda Anita Green, flight attendant.
Donald Freeman Green.
Linda Gronland.
Richard J. Guadagno.
First Officer Leroy Homer.
Toshia Kuge.
Looking forward to that great resurrection day, our beloved
Cece Ross Lyles, my mother.
Hilda Marson. Hilda Marson. Hilda Marson. Hilda Marson. Waleska Martinez. Nicole Carol Miller.
Our brother, Louis Joey Nagy II.
Donald Arthur Peterson. Jean Hoadley Peterson. Mark David Rothenberg. Christine Ann Snyder. John Talignani. Honor Elizabeth Wainio. Deborah Jacobs Welsh, flight attendant.
Albert Einstein once said, "There are two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle." Today, we celebrate a miracle. Beyond race, beyond creed, beyond age, beyond place of origin, in spite of the fact that most were stranger and alien to the other, a family was born. A community was founded. Strength was found, and decisions were made in what was the spur of the moment. We celebrate the miracle of the 40. But we always need to realize that that miracle lies in all of our hearts, in all of our lives. Their miracle is our possibility. Their 18 years ago is our today, and tomorrow. I ask you to join with me in a moment of silent prayer and meditation. Amen and amen. It is my joy to introduce to you our opening keynote speaker, Professor Mitchell Zukoff.
Thank you, Reverend Britton. Thank you to the families of Flight 93. We gather here on this 18th anniversary of 9/11 at a complicated moment in our nation's history, a time of hotly raging debates over the meaning of American values. I'm an author and a professor, and I'm not here to be political. I'm here to make what I consider to be the apolitical case that by their actions, their statements, and ultimately their shared sacrifice, the 40 passengers and crew members of United Flight 93 should be celebrated and emulated for representing the greatest of all American values. When they boarded that flight in Newark, New Jersey, they came from an array of ethnic and racial backgrounds. They practiced a variety of religions. They held a range of political views. And then at 9:28 a.m., when confronted by terrorist hijackers, these 40 strangers set aside individual interests. Through phone calls, they collected information about what happened at the World Trade Center and soon after the Pentagon. They turned to one another, sharing what they knew from those calls and what they could see in front of them. And in mere minutes, they transformed into a cohesive unit and an unstoppable force. Again and again, in phone calls from the plane to the ground, they spoke of their planned uprising as a joint effort. Passenger Tom Burnett told his wife Dina, "A group of us are getting ready to do something." Flight attendant Sandy Bradshaw told her husband Phil, "Some passengers are getting hot water from a galley." Passenger Todd Beamer told Airphone Supervisor Lisa Jefferson, "A few of us are getting together." Flight attendant Cece Lyles told her husband Lorne, "We've got a plan." And passenger Jeremy Glick told his wife Liz, "Some guys are rallying together." And then Jeremy told Liz something even more remarkable. He said they were taking a vote. How American is that? Facing an existential crisis, they decided to vote on a response. From the phone calls and the recovered cockpit tapes, we know how that vote turned out. We know they banded together. We know they answered the call, "Let's roll." We know they fought bravely. We know they battled to the very end. At the cost of their own lives, the rebels of Flight 93 found a measure of success by forcing the followers of Al-Qaeda to crash the plane on the sacred grounds where we gather today. In their determination to save themselves, they saved countless others in the U.S. Capitol or the White House, and they gave us the first glimmer of hope at a terrible moment. Let me also note that the people, the good people of Somerset County, Pennsylvania, in their own way did much the same. When they raced to the land that they knew as the old Diamond T coal mine, they didn't ask who was on board the plane or where they were from or how they prayed. They only asked, "How can we help?" They have continued to ask and answer that question every day since, opening their arms to the world. Recently, I was emailing with Donna Glessner, founder of the Flight 93 Ambassador Program. She was struck by how in my book I named all 40 passengers and crew members in a section that details their heroism. We talked about why I decided to list them all especially since in the narrative I didn't name everyone aboard all the other hijacked planes. The fact is, when writing about Flight 93, I felt I didn't have any other choice. In my line of work, it's the goal to know exactly what happened. That way, I can convey it to readers with absolute certainty. But for the story of Flight 93, some details will be forever lost to history, lost when the plane struck the ground. I've made my peace with that. More than that, I've embraced it, and I urge you to do so as well. The result is that we are compelled to celebrate every man and every woman aboard that plane equally and collectively. Their story, like the American story, is about more than individual achievement or individual interests. It's about the power of what can be accomplished when people trust one another and find strength in one another. In doing so, the men and women of Flight 93 changed from strangers to partners, from fingers to a fist. As Abraham Lincoln said on another battlefield, one not far from here, it is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It's my belief that the legacy of the passengers and crew of Flight 93, the work they so nobly advanced, was the cause of the common good. In America, the stranger with different beliefs or background might become your greatest ally, your blood brother or sister, engaged alongside you in the fight for survival, or perhaps the eternal struggle for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Be open to that possibility. And by doing so, we honor the sacrifice by the 40 heroes of Flight 93 as the utmost embodiment of true American values. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. We truly appreciate you being here with us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, from time to time, people come into your life who you just know at that very moment that you meet them that they are something special. Gordy Felt, president of the families of Flight 93, is indeed one of those individuals. Gordy is the brother of Flight 93 passenger Edward Porter Felt. Over the last several years, I have gotten to know Mr. Felt on a personal level and have always admired his unwavering and steadfast dedication to Flight 93 National Memorial. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Gordy Felt.
Good morning. Mr. Vice President, Secretary Bernhardt, Superintendent Clark, Mr. Zukoff, Reverend Britton, distinguished guests, President Condi, those that serve our nation through their work with the National Park Service, the Flight 93 National Memorial Ambassadors, partners in this great memorial's development from the National Park Service, the National Park Foundation, and the Friends of Flight 93, visitors, and dearest to my heart, families of Flight 93. I welcome you all to our annual service to honor the 40 extraordinary heroes of United Flight 93. Here we are again, a year since our last commemorative gathering. We've seen hundreds of thousands of visitors in the past 12 months pass through the gates and pay their respects to the heroes of Flight 93. Technology and the iron will of our partners at the Flight 93 National Memorial have enabled the Flight 93 story to be shared with interested parties around the world. And attendance figures here in Somerset County continue to trend upward. Volunteerism at the memorial is strong, and through the efforts of the National Park Service and the Friends of Flight 93, we are seeing the ground on which this memorial was built come back to life through reforestation and other critical projects designed to heal the land. School groups, veterans, tourists, history buffs, and concerned citizens of the world continue to be drawn to the sacred ground, and for good reason. Our history, our heritage, time and time again speak of instances where common people rise to take extraordinary actions when under the greatest of pressures, heroism revealed in a time of crisis. Our loved ones, those 40 heroes, are remembered well and given the honor and dignity that they deserve at this site. May they rest peacefully, embraced in the loving arms of their families and those that will forever remember their sacrifice. This memorial, this sacred ground, serves as a reminder to us all that the heroes of Flight 93 helped to change the course of our history. Those 40 individuals were private citizens on the morning of September 11th, 2001. Because of their actions on that fated blue sky morning, just as we have today. Their memory belongs to us all, and their actions will inspire generations to come. For those that choose to remember, inspiration can be a salve that helps to heal an eternal wound and provides solace to those that lost so much that morning. Our lives these past 18 years have taken a new course. Understanding the reasons for this pivot and remembering the lessons learned leading up to this change are critical factors in assuring that history cannot and will not repeat itself. Our task, that of you and me and of our leaders, is to never forget that were it not for the actions of the crew members and passengers of United Flight 93, this pivot, the course of our lives and that of our country, may have been far more drastic than already experienced. Imagine the implications and our country's response to the attacks of September 11th if we witnessed the destruction of our Capitol building, and how even more our lives would have been changed from that day forward. Who lives? Who dies? Who tells your story? A song from the musical Hamilton, written by Lin-Manuel Miranda, asks, "When my time is up, have I done enough?" I can't imagine asking any more of the 40 heroes that perished on this sacred ground fighting for their lives, and in the process saving our country from an even darker end to September 11th, 2001. But how about you? How about me? Or any of us here today? Have we done enough? Are we letting the lessons learned on September 11th, 2001 affect decisions that we are making in 2019? Or have we filed those lessons away to be resurrected once a year on this day? I ask that you remember that any one of us could have been on board Flight 93 that morning. Any one of us could have been faced with the unspeakable horror of facing down evil incarnate. Any one of us could have been forced to choose between passivity under pressure or fighting to survive. How can we continue to be inspired by the heroes of Flight 93 and let this inspiration affect our lives on a daily basis? I say to you that the genesis of our loved ones' power on the morning of September 11th, 2001, emanated from three critical factors. Factors that, if incorporated into our daily lives and the foundational principles of our communities, would serve us well while honoring our heroes. These three factors are strength through diversity. The crew and passengers of Flight 93 were made up of citizens of many nations, a variety of races, religions, political backgrounds, sexual orientations, various professions and passions, a spectrum of ages, and the list of diversity goes on and on. This unique blend of individuals allowed for diverse experiences to help formulate the plan. and quickly respond as modern-day Minutemen and women to the crisis unfolding before their eyes and across our country that morning. The second factor, a commitment to democratic principles. Our loved ones sought strength through collective actions. We know that they formulated a plan, they prayed, and then voted to determine their path forward. Each passenger and crew member was given and presumably took the opportunity to choose their own course of action. The only people on the flight that were trying to dictate terms that morning were overwhelmingly defeated. And three, a willingness to make the tough decisions. Do what's right, not what's easy. Faced with the unimaginable horror of the morning, our loved ones knew that they could not just sit back and let history unfold before them. In a scenario that unfortunately is becoming more normalized, in a world that is becoming far more dangerous, the heroes of Flight 93 chose to fight. Those 40 diverse individuals formulated a plan, voted, and then stood up and said, "No, we're coming for you." Three basic concepts that seem simple when stated, but so difficult to execute under pressure. Let us remember these principles and incorporate them into our everyday lives, showing the world that we can be better. Let us continue to be inspired by the story of Flight 93 and honor the memory of those 40 extraordinary individuals. Let us hope that when faced with the difficult decisions that life presents to us, that we too can rise and be extraordinary. Let us continually ask ourselves, to paraphrase Lin-Manuel Miranda, when our time is up, have we done enough? Thank you.
James, thank you once again to you and your entire band. So fitting and absolutely beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. At this time, I would like to introduce the Secretary of the Department of the Interior, Mr. David Bernhardt. Secretary Bernhardt was confirmed as the 53rd Secretary on April 11th of this year. As Secretary of the Interior, he leads an agency with more than 70,000 employees who are stewards for 20% of this nation's lands, including monuments, wildlife refuges, and national park sites, just like this one. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Secretary David Bernhardt.
Good morning. I'm going to go off script for the first time in my life. I want to say there have been some great speeches in American history given outside in the state of Pennsylvania. And Gordy, I think your speech was one of the most eloquent set of remarks I've ever seen. Now, Mr. Vice President Pence, Mrs. Pence, families of Flight 93, friends of Flight 93 National Memorial, members of the National Park Service, and my fellow Americans, I am honored to join you today as we remember and recognize the lives lost on Flight 93 18 years ago. Each of us know exactly where we were on this day, one of the few days in American history where this nation and the world seemed to stand still. We will never forget how this transformed us as a people and a nation. Each year we honor nearly 3,000 innocent lives lost in the Twin Towers, at the Pentagon, and right here in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. But this particular year is unique. This year, young Americans who were born after the attacks have enrolled in college, where they will join many peers who have no direct memory of what transpired. For them, 9/11 is a historical event, a date like so few others that is permanently ingrained in our own memory. The Flight 93 National Memorial is vital in sharing our story with that of the world. Many national monuments that the Department of the Interior's National Park Service administers, like this memorial, are an integral part of our American identity. This memorial mourns the lives lost on a flight that, were it not for a brave few, might have changed the course of history for the worse. It forever serves a reminder of why America is the home of the brave. Among those brave heroes on Flight 93 was a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service employee, Richard Guadagno. Recovery efforts at the site were difficult and devastating. But a month after the crash, investigators found Richard's Fish and Wildlife Service badge resting in a tree. For us at the Department of the Interior, that badge, which is on display at the Memorial's Visitor Center, serves as a moving reminder of all of our fallen colleagues who've gone beyond the call of duty to keep our fellow citizens, our communities, and our land safe. And for all Americans, the badge is a tangible symbol of the loss our nation suffered nearly 2 decades ago. As Secretary of the Interior, but most of all as an American, I take comfort in knowing that President Trump and Vice President Pence are keeping America safe and secure. President Trump knows firsthand the devastation the attacks brought to his city and this nation. And he and the Vice President are committed to keeping the American people safe, from forces of evil throughout the world. And they are, as we are, committed to honoring the heroes of Flight 93 and all the victims of 9/11. And now I have the honor of introducing the Vice President of the United States, Mr. Mike Pence. Please come up. Thank you, sir.
Secretary Bernhardt, distinguished guests, my fellow Americans, and most of all, the families of the heroes who perished here. It is September 11th again, and it is deeply humbling as Vice President of the United States to stand before you today at the Flight 93 National Memorial as we pause to honor the 40 heroic Americans who were lost in this place 18 years ago. Today, all across this country, Americans will pause to reflect, remember, and never forget the events of this day 18 years ago. In New York City, at the Pentagon, and here in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Here, where a common field one day became a field of honor forever. On this most solemn of days, our hearts are also with the families of the 2,753 men and women who lost their lives at the World Trade Center, and the 184 men and women who perished at the Pentagon. The President just this morning paid his respects to the fallen outside the Pentagon. We gather, as President Trump said earlier today, in his words, as one American family, united by patriotism, bound by destiny, and sustained by faith in Almighty God. The Bible says, if you owe debts, pay debts. If honor, then honor. If respect, then respect. And President Trump asked me to be here today to pay a debt of honor to the memory and the families of the 40 passengers and crew members of Flight 93. Men and women who rose up, who fought back, and who met unspeakable evil with selfless heroism and American strength. America was attacked on September the 11th. But America took the fight back to our enemies on that very same day. Not on some foreign battlefield, but right here, in the skies above these fields, where the heroes of Flight 93 were forged. 18 years ago, today was a beautiful Tuesday morning, when United Flight 93 left Newark Airport bound for San Francisco, carried on board 40 men and women from all across America from every walk of life. At only 20 years of age, Dory Frances Bodley was the youngest person on board. A student at Santa Clara University, she volunteered at her local animal shelter and aspired to be a child psychologist. On September 11th, she was flying home after visiting friends in New Jersey. Also on board was Edward Porter Felt, an accomplished man with degrees in Colgate, Cornell University, 2 patents in encryption technology. Devoted husband, a father of 2 daughters. The New Jersey native was making a last-minute business trip to San Francisco. Then there was a flight attendant, Wanda Anita Green, who had worked for United Airlines for 29 years. A mother of 2, the deacon at her church. She earned a real estate license, dreamed of opening her own real estate office after retiring from flying. And Richard Guadagno, as you just heard, a dedicated public servant, project manager for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where he'd worked for 17 years. On September 11th, he was going home after celebrating with his parents, sister, and family his grandmother's 100th birthday. A lawyer, public relations executive, an antique dealer, a World War II veteran. As you've heard so eloquently from this podium already this morning, they were ordinary Americans, but their heroism would inspire the nation. When they took off at 8:42 a.m., their flight must have seemed just like any other. They had no way of knowing that within 4 minutes, American Flight 11 would hit the North Tower. Within 21 minutes, United Flight 175 would hit the South Tower of the World Trade Center. And within 46 short minutes, their own flight would be hijacked by terrorists determined to strike another attack, this time on our nation's capital. And they had no way of knowing, those 40 remarkable men and women, that within 81 minutes from takeoff, their lives would be over. They would enter eternity. But not before they had earned a place of honor in the annals of American history and in the hearts of every American. It was 9:35 in the morning when the plane diverted toward Washington, D.C. And immediately the men and women of Flight 93 sprang into action. They began calling their loved ones and soon learned of the attacks that were gripping our nation. When Tom Burnett's wife told him about the attack on the Pentagon, he replied, "We have to do something." And so they did. At 9:47 a.m., Jeremy Glick told his wife that the passengers were voting on whether to charge the cockpit. And he later told her that those on board voted to act. And so they did. Talking with her husband on the phone, flight attendant Sandy Bradshaw uttered words that captured perfectly her and the passenger's clarity of purpose. She said, "Everyone's running to first class. I've got to go. Bye." And in the midst of the chaos, a young husband and father, a man starting a business career, prayed the Lord's Prayer with an airphone operator and recited a verse from the 23rd Psalm, only then to speak words that would echo the resolve of a nation. Let's roll. History records they ran forward. They charged toward the cockpit. At 10:03 a.m., Flight 93 plummeted to the earth. Right here. In the early days after the attacks, a Pennsylvania state trooper hung an American flag on an old drag line, sitting atop a hill overlooking this crash site. But now, 18 years later, there stands a memorial and an even more fitting tribute to the courage and sacrifice of that day. Just not far from here stands a 93-foot-tall Tower of Voices, which today holds 8 chimes, each with a different musical note, to symbolize the voices of all of those lost 18 years ago. When played together, the notes form a perfect harmony, just as in their final moments, the men and women of Flight 93 worked in concert to defend our nation, defend our capital, and defend our way of life. Here, at this memorial, the names of those 40 men and women are etched in marble. But I want to assure their precious families, they're also carved into the hearts and the memory of the American people. The Bible tells us that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And that's our prayer for you this day and every day. And it's our prayer for all of the families all across our nation who meet this day each year to remember a personal loss. We're with you. To the families gathered here, you honor us by your presence. And America stands with you. The American people will never forget or ever fail to be inspired by the courage of the men and women of Flight 93. We honor them by remembering them. And we honor them by resolving here and now that we will do as they did, each of us, in all of our varied roles, to prevent such evil from ever reaching our shores again. When Flight 93 went down, the heroes aboard were the first of a new generation of Americans to rise up as citizen soldiers in what would come to be known as the global war on terror. After September 11th, the rising generation of the new millennium also answered the call. And recruiting stations across the country had lines around the block. Since this day 18 years ago, 5.5 million Americans have stepped forward to defend our country by enlisting in the armed forces of the United States, and we honor each and every one of them this day. And we especially honor the memory of the nearly 7,000 other Americans who gave their lives on other fields of battle since this day 18 years ago. To their families looking on, we pledge we will never forget or fail to honor the service and sacrifice of our fallen heroes. Today we honor those who fell on this hallowed ground. And in honoring them, we also honor every fallen hero since that day. We honor them by remembering their sacrifice. And as President Trump has done from the first day of this administration, we also honor our fallen by ensuring that the men and women serving in our armed forces today have the resources, training, and equipment to accomplish their mission and defend this nation. And this we will always do. We did not start this war. We did not seek it. But in every year that's passed, our armed forces have taken the fight to the enemy on our terms, on their soil. We've met the evildoers with a resolve and force beyond anything they could have imagined. Our armed forces took the fight to the terrorists who attacked us in the mountains of Afghanistan. Their mastermind met justice at the hands of Navy SEALs in Abbottabad. And our armed forces just this year captured the last inch of territory controlled by the barbaric ISIS caliphate. But the threat of terrorism remains, and I can assure you, under this Commander-in-Chief, our armed forces will never relent until the earth is purged of the scourge of radical Islamic terrorism. What the terrorists of 9/11 did not understand is that the American people's love of peace is exceeded only by our resolve to defend our freedom. The fiery ordeal through which the heroes of Flight 93 passed lit the way for heroes that were to come. And it will inspire generations of Americans for all time. It is truly a privilege to be with you today here in Shanksville, along with my wife Karen, to honor the memory of the heroes of Flight 93. I pay tribute as Vice President and as a grateful American. But as I said when we were here 2 years ago, for us and our family, it's personal. 17 years ago, I was serving in Congress, and my wife and I made a point to bring our 3 small children here to this hallowed ground on a drive back from Washington, D.C. to Indiana. It was less than a year from that terrible day, but we wanted to come here to pay our respects and make sure that our children saw this place and knew what happened here. I remember that day like it was yesterday. We didn't find this impressive memorial. We found a plywood wall painted with the names of the fallen. A timeline listed. And a wooden cross in the field. With the help of one park ranger, we learned of the sequence of that day. And I remember asking the ranger, If the United States Capitol was the target, at what time would the plane have reached the Capitol building? And what she told me, I'll never forget. For at the time she mentioned, I, along with hundreds of others, was standing near the east front of the House of Representatives. As I stand before you today, I say from my heart, I will always believe that I and many others in our nation's capital were able to go home that day and hug our families because of the courage and selflessness of your families, the heroes of Flight 93. Two years ago, on this occasion, I toured the Memorial Museum. And there I took note of one of the possessions of a passenger that was recovered at the crash site. Among what was left of what Todd Beamer brought on board was a book entitled A Life of Integrity by Howard Hendricks. As I looked at the display through the glass, I was struck by the book's title and how perfectly it represented what the men and women of Flight 93 demonstrated on that day, 18 years ago. Shortly thereafter, I purchased a copy of the same edition of that devotional book. And it has flown with me every day since on Air Force Two as a quiet tribute, not just to the man, but to all the passengers and crew of Flight 93 for all you've done for us. For what your loved ones did for my little family and countless others in our nation's capital that day. We thank you. When heroes fall, words fail. For no greater love has a man than this, that he should lay down his life for his friends. This then is what the heroes of Flight 93 did. And it's important that we tell their story. I'm grateful that all of you are here today to hear it one more time. It's important that we tell their stories. Because, as has already been observed, a whole generation of Americans has come of age with no personal memory of 9/11. So the rest of us, my fellow Americans, must tell the story. We must never forget and never fail to honor the memory of those who were lost here in New York City and in Washington, D.C. And this we will do. We will tell their story. We will honor their memory, always. So to the families of the fallen, as President Trump said this morning at the Pentagon, I say now, the memory of your loved ones will never die. They will always be with us. We will always tell their story to future generations. And as long as this nation endures, Americans will ever be inspired by the faithful and courageous words and deeds of the heroes of Flight 93. So may God bless our beloved fallen. May God bless and comfort the families gathered here and all those who suffered loss on this day 18 years ago. And may God continue to bless the United States of America with such men and women as the passengers and crew of Flight 93.
Please be seated. Thank you again, Mr. Vice President, for your thoughtful words. And again, it is truly an honor to have you and the Second Lady with us today. As many of you know, Vice President Pence also joined us, as he mentioned, for the 16th annual observance 2 years ago. As we conclude here today, I am indeed reminded of Vice President Pence's words from that ceremony. I will never forget that sentiment that he shared of how on the morning of September 11th, 2001, as he stated, and I quote, "For me, it was personal." I'll never forget that. I remember that Vice President shared his firm belief that the heroism of the 40 passengers and crew members of Flight 93 may indeed saved his own life. As he stated, he was on Capitol Hill that morning. However, I believe there are many individuals who share that same sentiment, as many people were both inside and around the Capitol building that day. They included members of Congress, thousands of employees working inside that building, and countless citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, people don't just visit Flight 93 National Memorial. Rather, they make it a pilgrimage, as for them too, it is personal. Please allow me to share a few powerful messages left by visitors on comment cards very recently. Quote, "The passengers on this flight could have saved my life and many people I know because I was working near the Capitol building that morning, and many of my co-workers were in the Capitol at that time. Forever grateful." End quote. Signed, H. Thomas. Here's a message that was written directly to the families of Flight 93, left on September 7th, just 4 days ago. And I quote, "To the families of Flight 93, we will be forever grateful for your sacrifice for our son, Kevin, was working in the Capitol that day." End quote. And finally, a powerful message left on August 24th of this year. Quote, "Thank you for your brave, selfless actions in the midst of evil. Because of you, thousands more were saved. Our nation is forever thankful, and your memory will forever be remembered." Signed, a grateful American. As it is clear from the 3 examples above, it is very common to have powerful testimonials that mirror the Vice President's meaningful words, both today and also in 2017, left behind by visitors who visit Flight 93 National Memorial. Their monumental sacrifice was most certainly not in vain. All of us here at Flight 93 National Memorial thank all of you for pausing on this day to remember the heroes of Flight 93 and all those affected by the events of September 11th. We indeed remember those who perished here at the Twin Towers and also at the Pentagon. We carry their memory with us as we go forth from this place to better ourselves our communities, and our nation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for being with us today and sharing in this special day. Thank you.